From the archives of the great library of Arathis, golden city of Elves, the wise scholars of Grey Sage present the unlikely and highly questionable accounts from those who were avowed witness. These are the suspenseful investigations of the human, Fraenk Neversleep, Arch-Preceptor of Blackroot. And now, the Neversleep Scrolls, Circle of the Mind Thief, written by Phillip Walton. The story continues. Chapter 6.
The vendetta with the Greenbriars is over.
Lady Arice Blackroot, matriarch of the Blackroot family, leader of District Blackroot and sovereign member of the High Council of Elves, sat in an ornate seat at the head of the council room, and for one who had aged well over 600 years, this was not a trivial task. The elderly elf was dressed in elaborate arboreal patterned robes that hung from her delicate frame. Her silver hair was pinned back in an angled pair of platinum and gem-studded combs that looked like swords crossed behind her head. She was resplendent in her fury.
I have met with Lord Fernbrook and discussed the situation at great length. It is a grave concern any time an elf is killed, no matter the circumstance. And the killing of Lord Fernbrook's nephew, the brother of a sworn captain, not to mention an elf who was recently commended for bravery on the battlefield. An immense cost must be paid, and that price will be yours to bear.
Fraenk stood in the centre of the room. He looked terrible and smelled even worse. The Blackroot guards who scooped him up the moment he stepped out of Arathi's prison were insistent upon bringing him directly to see the High Elf. It must have been very serious, because the Arch-Preceptor in all his authority could neither bribe, cajole, nor threaten them into letting him wash up and put on clean clothes before he was dragged in before the lady. All eyes were upon him. The entire council of Elven Acherons who managed the district's business was there, flanking the room on either side. Captains of ceremony, coin, building, records, harbour, trade, and war. Their expressions were impassive, but there was sharp interest in their eyes. For council meetings in the past, Fraenk had been their contemporary as the Arch-Preceptor, working with them in support of the Blackroot district. But Fraenk knew the majority of them to be fair-weather allies at best, and this was a full-blown storm. He lowered his head in a suitable gesture of obeisance and let the lady's tempest run its course.
Lord Fernbrook has asked that the perpetrator be turned over to him for tribunal and commission of justice. Considering the trouble this has brought to the district and to me, I was inclined to accept.
She let the words hang in the air. Fraenk proffered his badge of office in an outstretched hand. My lady, I hereby resign as Arch-Preceptor and accept whatever you...
You will be silent until I give you leave to speak, Lord Neversleep. Do you know what I've had to deal with while you were on your leisurely little hiatus?
She snapped. Frank's mouth tightened to a line. Now would not be a good time to correct her that he had spent a month in the darkest cell just to keep an assassin's blade out of his ribs. The expression she bore looked like she was ready to finish the job that Carax could not.
Now where was I? Ah, yes, the penance to Lord Fernbrook. I could have handed you over to them, but I have negotiated an alternate arrangement instead. I will not be delving into the particulars of the arrangement, but suffice it to say that it cost the district dearly. However, Lord Fernbrook has accepted and will command his family that the blood debt has been paid.
Gasps and loud murmurs issued from the Acherons. Even Fraenk looked up, surprised. Whatever deal you struck, take it back, Fraenk shouted. You know Lord Fernbrook, and he'd set us afire just for the light to count his coins by.
That's a High Lord Elf you're talking about, Neversleep,
she barked. One of the Acherons, whom Fraenk didn't see, added a low, Show some respect, human. I don't give Guthal's iron gonads. You back out of that chard's bargain, you senile old crone, or I'll go turn myself over to the Greenbriars on my own. Insolence, shouted the haughty Torran Evenswan, Blackroot's Acheron of ceremony. He had apparently suffered this disrespect long enough.
You will do no such thing, and keep that contemptuous tongue inside your head before I have it removed entirely.
Lady Blackroot shot to her feet, surprising everyone, then began to creak and waver like some malevolent scarecrow. The room went completely silent. No one had seen her stand without aid in years. Her stupefied ladies-in-waiting scrambled forth to steady her.
Touch me and I'll have you working dockside on the Fishwives' Pier by nightfall.
She growled, and the two young elven maids backed off.
Now, I will say this only once and for all to hear. Fraenk? Oh, powers take you, Fraenk. What is your true surname?
I don't have one, my lady, Fraenk stammered.
Well, get one, damn you.
She scolded.
Fraenk, Neversleep, is and will remain the arch-preceptor of Blackroot, as it pleases me and sealed by my hand, Lady Arice Blackroot, High Lord of blah blah blah. Scribes fill in my honorarium, all of you are dismissed.
Lady Blackroot steadied herself and carefully eased back into her chair. This time she let the elven maidens get her seated. The room broke into an immediate sea of voices as the acherons, servants and scribes filed out of the chambers. Fraenk caught narrowed eyes from several of the ranking elves. The look from Evenswan was downright poisonous. They could despise him all they wanted, but Lady Blackroot made it clear he wasn't going anywhere, and they'd still have to work with him. "My lady, we must discuss what is to happen about that deadbeat galleon in my dry dock," interjected Lord Fenduin Talofrond, Acheron of Ports and Harbours, as he pushed toward the front of the room. "Every day it languishes, costing us hundreds of gold."
Not now, my Lord Talofrond,
Lady Blackroot said wearily, rubbing her temple. "I've sent several letters to Cyrusel already, demanding payment, my lady," he whined. The dark look she shot stopped him in his tracks. We'll discuss another time, of course," he squeaked and backpedaled out of the room with the rest. Fraenk caught a sudden whiff of a redolent odour that made his throat tighten and his eyes water, which turned out to be himself. He needed to get cleaned up, and a near-scalding rosewater and lavender oil bath was what he desired more than anything at the moment. That and a glass of amber. Fraenk turned to leave as well.
Not you, Fraenk,
she said with a voice as icy as the tomb of the frost giants of Bolar.
I require a private word.
Fraenk slowly turned back to face her. She waved her hand, sending her attendants out as well. When the room was finally empty, Lady Blackroot fixed him with her steel-grey eyes.
Did you really call me a senile old crone, Fraenk?
Did I? I don't rightly recall. Lady Blackroot sighed.
After a few centuries, you stop turning the young men's heads. It is a hellish thing growing old, but there is also a relief in it as well. My days of fighting these insipid squabbles will be over.
I meant no offence. Fraenk started to apologise.
Of course you did, but that's why I need you, Fraenk. You speak your mind, even when it's dangerous to you. That's exactly why I need you back in the district. We have greater troubles than some petty grievances.
You should have seen the size of the petty grievance that tried to carve out my guts.
If people didn't want you dead, I'd say you weren't doing your job,
she said with a smile. So what deal did you strike with the Fernbrooks? He inquired.
You're supposed to be the Acheron of secrets. You'll figure it out.
I take back the senile bit. You're too clever by half, Fraenk smiled. I'm sure the other Lord Elves would see you put me back out on the streets, or far worse. I should probably thank you for leaving me my job.
You may well curse me before this is over, but in the meantime, go out and continue to earn it. We're at war, Fraenk. If that conniving scoundrel Lord Fernbrook wants you gone, I owe it to all of Blackroot to keep you right where you are.
My life is yours, my lady. Fraenk clenched his fist over his chest and bowed in salute, then turned to leave. At the door he paused. One thing I was pondering down during my relaxing foray in the dungeon. Did you really sell that bakery to Lord Fernbrook?
I don't see what that has to do with...
That elf said the bakery was his property. That you sold it, in fact. Our murdered baker was dressed for work and didn't look like he knew anything about it. So I'll ask again. Did you sell Mycon's place out from under him without even telling him? Tell me true. She paused for a long time.
You're going to call me a senile old crone again?
What did you do?
The High Lords have a private gathering where we meet and discuss matters of importance, and also get a respite from the piety and prying eyes that are all around us, where we can indulge in trivialities that the rest of you get to enjoy and that we must pretend to disdain.
You get drunk and find a handsome half-elf to nibble your pointed ears.
Oh, grow up, Fraenk. But yes, that does happen. We play this game. Do you know Monarch's Cuckold? There's 4 dice and 7 cards.
Bran's Bond, and I thought I was vulgar, Fraenk exclaimed, somehow both amused and a bit scandalised. We call it Liar's Gambit in the dice dens.
That night I was having the best run of luck. A Queen's Dodger, Lord Pembroke's nursemaid, Healthy Squire's Tower, twins in the bodice. I had all of the High Elves on the back foot, and Lord Fernbrook, who has always been a terrible sport, just smiled and played. Mind you, he never took any kind of loss with anything but cries of bottom dealing or foul enchantments. But that night he smiled, and it gave me an ill feeling. But I was winning, and a bit loose if you know what I mean, so I kept playing.
But then, Fraenk prompted.
But then we got to the last round. I was riding high with a Mary's got her hands full, and all he's got is a lonely uncle's hat box. There was one last roll of the dice, and Lord Fernbrook goes to match the bet, only he doesn't have enough to cover, so he puts up the East Gate, the actual East Skarking Gate, all tariffs, taxes and duties. You know how valuable that is, Fraenk. There's no way I can lose. So the last turn came up, and by Shallowcar's own luck, he shows a monarch's cuckold.
What?
No magic, no cheating. He'd been sitting on it the whole time,
she said, still dumbfounded. And so you lost, and now you owed him. Fraenk straightened.
Once again.
What do you mean? How many times has this happened? The old elf looked embarrassed. Frank's mind immediately began putting pieces together. He didn't need her answer. You've been losing pieces of the district for months, Fraenk said. Rows of human slums, the derelict storehouse on the district border, the 4 shops in Little Halfling Town.
The uncanny string of luck from this elf, Fraenk. It's like he's cheating somehow. But the dice and cards are proved by a paladin. There's no enchantment on them. I don't know how he does it.
Oh, there's ways, Fraenk replied grimly. So Fernbrook asked for the bakery?
Not right away. He wanted his own dock in the harbour at first, but then later that night his arch-preceptor showed up and said he urgently wanted that bakery instead. Well, it was worth hardly 1/10 of the value, so I...
You made the deal.
What else could I do?
Don't keep things like that from me in the future, Fraenk said gravely. And what of this latest arrangement, the one for my safety?
Fraenk, what matters is that it's all settled now. Just leave it be. The Fernbrooks have promised you'll be left alone, but you need to stay out of their business.
Did they strike this latest deal with you before or after their man tried to bleed me in the black cells?
Enough. You've come to the limit of my patience, Neversleep. Now, go and see to my district, and I'll have no more trouble between you and the Fernbrooks.
Fraenk left the council chambers with his mind buzzing. Bass Greenbriar was indeed the rightful owner of the bakery. But why was it so urgent for Lord Fernbrook to own the property? And why did Bass kill Mycon and his family? Frank's mind gnawed at this puzzle. He would have no more answers until he could take a second look at the bakery. Thank you for listening. Tune in next week for another exciting episode. And remember, the learned scholars of Grey Sage caution you that the veracity of these events remains unproven. Now go safe in the light of the powers, until our hands clasp again.